I'm going to show you a very easy way to solve for some of the word problems that we'll see in physical science. And since our second unit we talk about speed, let's start with those problems. You'll notice on the screen here I have a triangle, and inside the triangle I have different letters. The different letters stand for the different variables that we will see in a problem. There will always be three variables when we're dealing with speed problems: velocity, distance, and time. And we'll be solving for one of them, but we will have been given the other two. Before we learn how to use the triangle, let's go over some of the units that we will have with the numbers that go along with the different variables, because that's the hardest part sometimes for students in solving these problems, is identifying the numbers and deciding, is that a distance measurement, is that velocity, or is that time? So if you keep in mind some of the different units that you'll see, it'll be a little easier for you. For velocity, some of the units that we will see that go along with velocity are meters per second, centimeters per second, kilometers per hour, and occasionally, even though it's not part of the metric system, we may see miles per hour. Some of the distance units that you will see in these problems will be meters, kilometers, and centimeters. Those are the three most common ones. And for time, you should be familiar with the time units. We're going to see seconds, minutes, and hours. So if you keep those in mind when you're trying to identify the variables, the problems become much easier. All right, so how do we determine what the equation is going to be for each problem? I'll show you how to use the triangle, and then we'll have some examples that we can do. Let's say I have a word problem, and I'm given two variables. And the two variables I'm given are velocity and time, and I have to solve for distance. If you look at the triangle and you cover up what you're solving for, that leaves you with the two variables. Here I have velocity and time. And if you notice, velocity and time in the triangle are next to each other. And in a math equation, when two numbers are next to each other, you're going to multiply them. So in this case, my equation is going to be D equals V times T, velocity times time. All right, let's say I have a word problem, and the two variables that are given to me are the distance and the time, and I need to find out what the velocity is. I'm going to cover up V for velocity because that's what I'm trying to solve. And I'm going to look at the way the numbers are situated on the triangle, and I notice my distance is on the top and my time is on the bottom. And if I were to put that into a math equation, V equals distance is on the top and time is on the bottom, it's a simple division problem with distance on the top and time on the bottom. Now finally, if the two variables that I'm given are distance and velocity, and I need to figure out how long it took the object to get where it was going, I'm going to cover up the T for time because that's what I'm trying to solve for. And then I'm left with the distance on the top and velocity on the bottom. And if that were a math equation, it would be a division problem. So my equation here would be time equals distance over velocity. It's exactly how it looks in the triangle. All right, so now that you know how to use the triangle, let's get a little practice. And every time you do a word problem, There are 5 steps. When I grade my homework or my quizzes or my tests and there's a word problem there, they're always worth 5 points because there are 5 steps that you need to take in order to get full credit. The reason we do this is because if you skip steps, you're going to get sloppy and you're going to make mistakes. So if you go through all 5 steps, then you shouldn't have any trouble getting the correct answer. All right, so I have a problem here. The problem says, how long does it take a bird to fly 300 kilometers if it travels at a speed of 50 kilometers per hour? I put my triangle here because I'm going to need that to help me figure out what equation I want to use. And the first step I'm going to take, so step number 1, is to figure out what do I know and what don't I know. So I need to figure out my knowns and my unknowns. And in this case, the first number I see is 300 kilometers. Kilometers is a distance measurement, so I'm going to put that next to where I wrote down distance. It's a good idea to write down your 3 variables and then just fill in, and then you can see what is missing. My second number is 50 kilometers per hour. 50 kilometers per hour is a velocity or a speed. So I'm going to write that down, which leaves me with time. So there are a couple ways you can figure out what you're solving for. You can read it in the problem. The first couple words say, how long does it take? So you would be solving for a time. Or you can just go through picking out the numbers and figuring out what is missing. So time is missing. So we need to come up with an equation where we're looking for time. So the second step is to write our equation. And in my triangle, I'm going to cover up time. Time equals, and my distance is on top of my velocity. So I write my equation like this. It's very important when I say to write the equation that you write it with the letters or the variables, not the numbers yet. All right, step 3 is to plug in your numbers. And be careful not to just forget what you wrote over here and start dividing on your calculator. Make sure that your distance number goes on the top. And notice I wrote down my units. It's very important to write down your units as well as the numbers. So my velocity goes on the bottom. And then you will divide that out and do the math. That's step 4. So t equals 60. And I'm looking for a time measurement or a time unit. And the only time unit in this problem is hours. So my answer is 60 hours. The unit would be your 5th point. Okay, let's try another one. This problem says Alex rode his bicycle 60 kilometers in 4 hours. How fast was he going? All right, so step number 1 is to find your knowns and your unknowns. So if I look at my problem, 60 kilometers. Kilometers is a distance measurement. So I'm going to write that down. And then I'm going to look at the next number, which is 4 hours. And hours is a time measurement. So I'm going to write that down as well. That leaves me with velocity as my unknown. So I'll put a question mark there. All right, step 2, I need to write out my equation. I'm not going to just jump right in and plug the numbers in yet. So if I'm solving for velocity, I'm going to cover velocity up, and what I see is distance on top of time, and I'm going to write it just how it looks. Step 3, you're going to plug in your numbers. So velocity equals distance first, which is here, 60 kilometers, over time, which is here, 4 hours. And step 4 is to solve now. Velocity equals 15. And then my 5th step is my unit. And there's 2 ways I can do this. I'm looking for velocity, so I can look at my units in the problem and determine it that way. But an easier way is to see that I have a unit on top here, and then a unit on the bottom. And that's exactly how it's going to look in your final answer. So my final answer is 15 kilometers per hour. And you might want to double check yourself and make sure that kilometers per hour is a velocity. All right, let's do one more practice problem. The problem is an aircraft is flying at a speed of 235 kilometers per hour. How far will it fly in 3 hours? All right, I set up my knowns and my unknowns. That's my first step. And if I look at my first number, 235 kilometers per hour, that is a velocity measurement. So I'm going to write that out. And if I look at my second number, 3 hours, and that's a time measurement, which leaves me with distance. So now I'm trying to solve for distance. So my second step is to write out the equation. If I'm trying to solve for distance, distance equals, notice these 2 numbers are next to each other, and in a math problem they would be multiplied. So it's velocity times time. So now I'm just going to plug in my numbers. That's step 3. Remember, it's important to always have the units with the numbers. So I have 235 kilometers per hour times 3 hours. All right, so if we're going to solve for that, 235 times 3 is distance equals 705, and my unit has to be a distance, and the only distance here is kilometers. But I should know that because if you see the way that the units are set up, I can cancel out my hours, and I'm only left with kilometers. If you do all 5 steps for each problem and don't try to take shortcuts, then you'll be successful every time.